There was a time when I thought being a bank manager meant I could spot any financial scam from a mile away. I had spent 15 years protecting other people's money, but I never imagined I'd need to protect my own from the woman I married. Remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It wasn't the late nights Alice claimed she spent at her yoga studio, or the mysterious shopping bags that appeared in our closet without explanation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. No, it was a simple alert on my phone that shattered the illusion of our perfect life together. The regional manager of First Capital Bank, I had built my career on attention to detail. Every transaction, every audit, every financial anomaly, nothing escaped my notice. My colleagues often joked that I could smell financial fraud from 3 floors away. They called me Eagle Eye Edward, and I took pride in that reputation. It had earned me respect, promotions, and the corner office on the 32nd floor of our downtown headquarters. Alice and I had met at a charity gala 5 years ago. She was stunning in a red dress, working the room with an effortless grace that caught everyone's attention. When she mentioned she worked in luxury real estate, it made perfect sense. She had that polished, sophisticated air about her that made people trust her instantly. I fell hard and fast, and within a year we were married. I never minded that Alice had expensive tastes. Her job selling multi-million-dollar properties meant she needed to look the part, and I was proud that I could provide that lifestyle for her. Designer clothes, luxury bags, high-end spa treatments, these were investments in her career, or so I told myself. Besides, our joint accounts were healthy, and I managed our finances with the same careful attention I gave to the bank's operations. "You work too hard, Eddie," she would say, massaging my shoulders as I reviewed our monthly statements. "Why don't you let me handle some of this? I deal with numbers all day too, you know, but I enjoyed our financial planning sessions. It made me feel like we were building something together, planning for a future that seemed bright and secure." Looking back now, I realize I'd been blind to the signs that had been there all along. Frank, my best friend since college and now a detective with the Financial Crimes Unit, had tried to warn me. We were having drinks one evening when he brought it up. "Ed, have you noticed anything unusual about Alice's spending lately?" he asked, careful to keep his tone casual. I laughed it off. "She likes nice things, Frank. You know that. It's part of her job." He nodded slowly, taking a long sip of his whiskey. "Just keep your eyes open, buddy. Sometimes things aren't what they seem." I dismissed his concerns. Frank had always been skeptical of Alice, but I chalked it up to his natural suspicion. As a cop, when you spend your days investigating financial crimes, everyone starts to look like a potential suspect. Our life together had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Alice's real estate business was booming, or so she told me. She would share stories about massive deals she was closing, luxury properties she was showing to foreign investors, champagne celebrations with satisfied clients. I never questioned it. Why would I? She was my wife, and trust was the foundation of our marriage. Then came the designer bags. Every few weeks a new one would appear in our closet. Hermès, Chanel, Louis Vuitton, each one worth thousands. When I asked about them, Alice would flash that dazzling smile that had first caught my attention at the gala. "Just some gifts. From grateful clients," she'd say, or "I got an amazing deal through a contact in the industry." I believed her, even when the explanation started to sound rehearsed, even when the numbers didn't quite add up. I chose to believe her. After all, I was the financial expert. If something was wrong, I would know, wouldn't I? The first real warning sign came during a routine review at the bank. I was going through high-value transaction reports, standard procedure for my position, when I noticed something odd. A series of purchases at luxury boutiques in the city, all made within hours of each other. The amounts were significant, but not enough to trigger automatic fraud alerts. What caught my attention was the pattern. It was exactly the kind of spending behavior we trained our staff to watch for. I almost scrolled past it. Almost. Then I saw the account holder's name, Edward Mitchell. My name. My heart rate picked up as I dug deeper. The transactions were from one of our joint credit cards, the one I rarely used, the one Alice insisted on keeping for emergencies. As I pulled up the transaction history, a knot formed in my stomach. Dozens of charges at high-end stores, restaurants I'd never heard of, hotels in the city. "Mr. Mitchell?" My assistant's voice came through the intercom, making me jump. "Your 3 o'clock is here." I closed the transaction records, trying to push down the unease rising in my chest. "Give me 5 minutes, Sarah." That evening, as I drove home to our penthouse apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The numbers kept running through my head. Amounts, dates, patterns. It was the kind of analysis I did every day at work, but this time it was personal. This time it was my money, my life, my marriage under scrutiny. Alice was home when I arrived, lounging on our leather sofa in designer loungewear, scrolling through her phone. She looked up with that same bright smile, but for the first time I noticed something calculated behind it. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, rising to greet me with a kiss. I forced a smile. "Interesting. Lots of unusual transactions to review." For a fraction of a second, something flickered in her eyes. Concern, fear, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Sounds boring," she laughed, running her fingers through my hair. "I'm going out with the girls tonight, don't wait up." As she disappeared into our bedroom to get ready, I sat in my home office, staring at my phone. I could check the credit card activity right now, confront her with the evidence. But something held me back. Years of handling financial investigations had taught me one crucial lesson. When you suspect fraud, you don't tip your hand too early. You gather evidence, build your case, and wait for the right moment. So I waited, watching as Alice emerged an hour later in a dress I'd never seen before, her new Chanel bag on her arm. "Love you," she called out as she headed for the door. "Don't work too hard." I listened to her heels click down the hallway, then pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. As I scrolled through the recent transactions, one thing became crystal clear. I might be an expert at protecting other people's money, but I had failed to protect my own. And now, sitting in my silent apartment, surrounded by the trappings of our supposedly perfect life, I had a decision to make. The bank manager in me knew exactly what to do with suspected fraud. The husband in me wasn't so sure. But as I stared at the mounting evidence on my screen, I realized this was just the beginning, and if Alice thought she could outsmart a man who had spent his career catching financial criminals, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson. That night, as Alice was out with her friends, I did something I'd never done before. I started pulling apart our entire financial history. Sitting in my home office, surrounded by the gentle hum of my computer, I began to notice patterns that my willful ignorance had previously masked. It started with cross-referencing the dates of her supposed real estate closings with our account activity. Alice had bragged about a huge commission from selling a penthouse in Highland Towers just last month, a deal that should have deposited at least $50,000 into our joint account. But as I scanned through the transactions, there was nothing. No large deposits, no commission transfers, nothing that indicated a successful multi-million-dollar property sale. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Hey, got a minute to talk?" I dialed his number, my eyes still fixed on the banking records spread across my screens. "Ed," Frank's voice was serious. "Remember that conversation we had about Alice's spending? Well, something came across my desk today that you need to know about." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt my chest tighten. I'm listening. We've been investigating a series of high-end retail fraud cases. Designer stores, jewelry shops, luxury boutiques. Someone's been making large purchases, then returning knockoff items for refunds while keeping the genuine articles. My hand gripped the phone tighter. And the security footage from Cartier shows a woman matching Alice's description. She was with a man, Ed. They looked close. The room seemed to spin slightly. "Send me the footage. Ed, maybe you should..." "Send it, Frank." A moment later, my phone pinged. The video was grainy but clear enough. There was Alice, dressed in a blazer I'd bought her for Christmas, leaning intimately close to a man I didn't recognize. They were examining a watch display, his hand resting casually on her lower back. The timestamp showed 2:15 p.m. last Tuesday, when she was supposedly showing a beachfront property to international clients. "The man's name is Alan Porter," Frank continued. "He's known to us, small-time con artist, usually preys on wealthy women, but lately he's stepped up his game." I watched the footage again, noting how comfortable they seemed together, how Alice laughed at something he said, how his fingers intertwined with hers when they thought no one was watching. "There's more," Frank added reluctantly. "We've traced some of the fraudulent returns to a storage unit in his name. It's filled with genuine luxury items, bags, watches, jewelry. We think they're running a sophisticated swap scheme." I thought about all those designer bags in our closet, the ones Alice claimed were gifts from grateful clients. How many of them were genuine? How many were part of this scam? "Why are you telling me this, Frank? Officially, I mean," he sighed. "Because tomorrow we're bringing him in for questioning. And Ed, there's a chance Alice's name might come up. I wanted you to hear it from me first." After hanging up, I sat in silence, the implications of what Frank had told me settling like lead in my stomach. But I wasn't ready to confront Alice. Not yet. I needed more proof, needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I logged into our bank's internal system, using my clearance as regional manager to access deeper transaction histories. The pattern started to emerge like a dark thread woven through our financial tapestry. Regular withdrawals from our joint accounts, always just under the amount that would trigger automatic notifications. Credit card charges at hotels I'd never heard of, restaurants where we'd never eaten. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. A safety deposit box, opened 6 months ago at our bank's downtown branch. Not in our joint names, but in Alice's name alone. The access logs showed she'd visited it weekly, sometimes multiple times a week. As I dug deeper, more inconsistencies surfaced. The luxury real estate company Alice claimed to work for, their commission records showed no sales under her name for the past year. The charity boards she said she sat on, no record of her involvement. It was as if the entire professional life she described to me was a carefully constructed fiction. My phone buzzed again. Alice, having the best time with the girls. "Don't wait up, honey. Love you." I pulled up the tracking on our shared credit card. The last charge was from 30 minutes ago. The Grand Hotel, room service for 2. The girls, indeed. Just then, another alert popped up on my screen. A real-time notification from our joint credit card. $2,500 at Tiffany & Co. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to decline the charge, to end this charade right now. But years of handling financial investigations had taught me patience. Sometimes you had to let the fraud play out to catch all the players involved. I thought about confronting her when she got home, about showing her the footage, the fraud reports, the web of lies I'd uncovered. But I knew Alice. She would have an explanation for everything. The man in the video, a client, the hotel charges, business meetings, the safety deposit box. Just keeping some personal items secure. No, if I wanted the truth, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to use my expertise, my position, my understanding of how financial fraud worked. Alice might be running a sophisticated scam with her boyfriend, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. She was married to the man who designed the bank's fraud detection systems. I pulled up our joint account agreements, the ones Alice had, signed without reading when we got married. On page 47, paragraph 3, there it was. My insurance policy. As primary account holder and a senior bank executive, I had the authority to implement emergency financial controls if I suspected fraudulent activity. No warnings required, no explanations needed, but I couldn't move too quickly. Alice and her boyfriend Alan thought they were clever, thought they had everything figured out. They didn't realize they were playing in my world now, where every transaction left a trace, every purchase created a pattern, and every lie had a paper trail. I opened my secure work laptop and began typing, "Suspected fraud report, case number 2025-117. If Alice wanted to play with banking fraud, I would show her exactly what a banking professional could do. By the time I was done, she and Alan would learn that stealing from a bank manager's accounts was the biggest mistake they could have made. My phone buzzed one more time. Another credit card alert. $8,900 at a boutique hotel for a weekend package. I smiled grimly as I added it to my growing file of evidence. Alice thought she was being clever, but she'd forgotten the first rule of banking. The house always wins, and in this case, I was the house. Frank called again, just as I was compiling the evidence. "Ed, you need to see this. I'm sending you something. From our surveillance on Alan Porter." Moments later, my email pinged. The attachment was a series of photos taken earlier that day. Alice and Alan walking into a jewelry store. Alice wearing the necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary. Alan carrying a designer briefcase I recognized, because I'd paid for it, thinking it was a gift for Alice's fictional business partner. "There's chatter," Frank continued. "They're planning something big, like 7-figure big, and Ed, they're using your bank's systems to do it." I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile forming. Let them try. Because what Alice and Alan didn't know was that tomorrow, when they attempted whatever scheme they'd cooked up, they'd find themselves walking into a trap. A trap set not by a jealous husband, but by a banking professional who'd spent his career catching people exactly like them. The first cracks in their perfect plan were about to become canyons. The next morning, I arrived at the bank earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even risen over the city skyline when I entered my corner office, but I wasn't alone. Frank was already waiting for me, a thick file folder in his hands and dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd been up all night. "You're not going to like what I found," he said, dropping the folder on my desk. Inside were surveillance photos, bank statements, and police reports, a paper trail of deception that made my discoveries from the night before look like child's play. Alice and Alan hadn't just been running a luxury goods scam, they'd been systematically preparing for something much bigger. "They're planning to hit your bank's wire transfer system," Frank explained, spreading out documents across my desk. "We've been tracking Alan's communications. He's got someone on the inside, not just at your branch, but in your department." My stomach tightened as I flipped through the evidence, screenshots of internal banking protocols, security override, codes, transaction approval processes, things only someone with high-level access would know. "The girlfriend before Alice?" Frank continued, pulling out another photo. "She worked at First Capital too. Different branch, same scam. They cleaned out 3 accounts before anyone noticed. But this," he tapped the documents on my desk, "this is different. They're not just after a few accounts, they're going after the entire wire transfer system." I started connecting the dots. Alice's sudden interest in my work schedule, her questions about Bank security, the way she'd casually mention which executives were on vacation. All those late-night calls she claimed were with clients. She'd been feeding information to Alan, helping him map out our bank's vulnerabilities. My computer pinged with a new email. The subject line made my blood run cold. Wire transfer protocol update. Immediate implementation required. That's not a real protocol update, Frank said, looking over my shoulder. They're trying to install malware into your system. Once it's in, they can override the security checks on international transfers. I opened our secure system, checking the scheduled transfers for the day. There it was, a series of pending international wire transfers, all set to trigger at different times, all just under the automatic review threshold. Together, they would move over $20 million to offshore accounts. The transfers are scheduled to start at noon, Frank noted. They're smart, spreading them out, keeping them just under the flags. If we weren't looking for it specifically, it might have worked. I pulled up Alice's access logs to our home banking system. She'd been methodically gathering information for months, taking screenshots of my account dashboards, copying down transaction codes. Every time I'd left my laptop open, thinking I was safe because I was home, she'd been harvesting data. "There's something else," Frank said quietly, pulling out one final document. "We found this in Alan's storage unit. It was a passport, my passport, but the photo had been replaced with Alan's. They weren't just planning to steal money, they were setting me up to take the fall. The international transfers would be traced back to my credentials, my accounts, my authorization codes. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the money would be gone, and all evidence would point to me as the inside man." My phone buzzed. A text from Alice. "Morning, honey. Don't forget we have dinner with the Andersons tonight. Love you." The Andersons, another lie. I checked, they didn't exist. Just another fabrication in Alice's web of deception. "We can arrest them now," Frank offered. "We have enough evidence." I shook my head, an idea forming. "Not yet. They think they're playing me, but they forgot something crucial." I pulled up our bank's security protocols. Not the real ones, but the fake ones Alice had been feeding to Alan. They thought they understood our system, thought they had found a way to bypass our security. But they were working with outdated information, seeing only what I had allowed them to see. "Look at this," I said, showing Frank my screen. Every time Alice accessed my laptop, every time she took screenshots of our systems, she was seeing exactly what I wanted her to see. Understanding dawned on Frank's face. "You knew?" "Not at first," I admitted. "But about a month ago I noticed some unusual access patterns, so I created a shadow system. Everything she saw, everything she reported back to Alan, was from a duplicate interface, real enough to fool someone looking for vulnerabilities, but not actually connected to the real system." Frank finished, a slow smile spreading across his face. I nodded, pulling up another screen. "The transfers they've scheduled, they think they're going to route through our international wire system, but really..." I typed in a command and the screen changed. "They're going to hit every fraud alert we have. The moment they try to move, that money will have them." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Alice. "Just booked us a surprise vacation. Can't wait to tell you about it tonight." A vacation. That would be their escape plan. Once the transfers went through, they'd disappear, probably with Alice using my stolen passport to throw investigators off their trail. "Here's what we're going to do," I said, turning to Frank. "Let them think their plan is working. Let them initiate the transfers. But instead of stopping them immediately, we follow the money." Frank nodded. "Catch everyone involved, not just Alice and Alan." I pulled up our real banking interface, the one Alice had never seen. "I'm going to need your help setting up a trap when they try to access our wire transfer system at noon." Just then, my office door opened. Sarah, my assistant, walked in with a concerned look on her face. "Mr. Mitchell, Mrs. Mitchell is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Frank and I exchanged glances. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see Alice standing in the reception area, dressed impeccably in a designer suit, clutching her bag, the same bag I'd seen in the security footage from Cartier. Perfect timing, I murmured, closing the evidence files on my desk. Frank, get your team ready. I think Alice is here to play her part in their little drama. As I watched my wife approach my office, I felt an odd sense of calm. She thought she was about to put the final piece of their plan into motion. Instead, she was walking right into mine. Send her in, I told Sarah, straightening my tie. And, Sarah, hold all my calls. This might take a while. Alice walked into my office with that same confident smile she'd worn for years. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes quickly scanned my desk for any sign that her plan had been discovered. Eddie, darling, she purred, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd surprise you for lunch. Lunch. The transfers were scheduled for noon. She was here to distract me, to make sure I wasn't at my computer when their plan went into action. Actually, I smiled, I'm glad you're here. There's something I need to show you. I reached for my keyboard, ready to reveal exactly who had been playing whom. Alice Mitchell was about to learn that she'd made a fatal mistake. She'd tried to con a man who wrote the book on banking fraud, and now she was going to pay the price. I'd spent my career teaching others how to spot fraud, but what I was about to do would be my masterpiece. As Alice sat across from my desk, perfectly poised in her designer suit, I deliberately pulled up a series of transaction records on my monitor. Have you ever wondered, I began casually, how our bank's fraud detection system really works? Alice's smile remained fixed, but I caught the slight twitch in her perfectly manicured fingers. Not really, honey. You know all that banking talk. Puts me to sleep. Humor me, I said, turning the screen slightly. See, when someone tries to commit fraud, they usually think they're being clever. They keep transactions just under alert thresholds, spread them across different accounts, use multiple points of access. I paused, watching her face. But what they don't realize is that every single action leaves a trace. Eddie, she laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it now. I thought we could have a nice lunch. Why are you talking about work? Frank had positioned himself quietly in the corner, observing. To Alice, he was just my friend stopping by for a visit. She had no idea he was recording every word, every reaction. It's fascinating, really, I continued, pulling up another screen. For example, did you know that every time someone accesses our banking system, it creates a unique digital fingerprint, even if they're just viewing account information or studying wire transfer protocols? The color drained slightly from Alice's face, but she maintained her composure. Years of running. Cons had made her good at hiding her reactions, but I was better at spotting them. The really interesting part, I went on, clicking through more screens, is how people think they can outsmart the system. They study the security protocols, learn the procedures, find what they think are vulnerabilities. I looked directly at her. But sometimes, Alice, what they're seeing isn't really what's there. Her phone buzzed. Probably Alan, wondering why she hadn't given him the signal to start their wire transfers. It was almost noon. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, reaching for her bag. And I really should go. I have a client waiting, like the clients at the Grand Hotel, I asked quietly. Or maybe the ones at Cartier. Or wait, perhaps you mean the Andersons. The ones we're supposedly having dinner with tonight. She froze, her hand halfway to her bag. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. You know, I continued, my voice remaining calm, banking isn't just about money. It's about patterns, like the pattern of a wife who suddenly asks lots of questions about wire transfer and protocols. Or the pattern of a supposedly successful real estate agent who hasn't actually sold a property in over a year. Eddie, she started, but I held up my hand. Or maybe the pattern of a woman who opens a safety deposit box in secret, visits it multiple times a week, all while her husband, the bank's regional manager, has no idea it exists. Alice's composure cracked, just slightly. "You've been spying on me?" I laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Spying? No, Alice, I've been doing my job, the same job you and Alan thought you could use against me." Her eyes widened at Alan's name, and I saw the moment she realized just how much I knew. "The thing about trying to con a banker," I said, pulling up one final screen, "is that you'd better be damn sure you understand the system you're trying to beat. Because if you don't, if you're working with, say, outdated information or fake security protocols, well..." Right on cue, my phone lit up with alerts. Noon. Their wire transfers were attempting to execute. That would be Alan now, I smiled, turning my monitor so she could see, trying to move $20 million using security codes that don't actually exist. Hitting every fraud alert we have, probably wondering why the transfers are failing. Alice's phone was buzzing continuously now. She stared at it, then at me, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. "How long?" I asked. "Eddie, I can explain..." "How long?" She swallowed hard. 8 months. Since I met Alan at that charity event. The one you were too busy to attend. I nodded slowly. "And the safety deposit box? The one where you've been storing all the genuine items while you return fakes to the stores?" "You don't understand," she said, leaning forward. "Alan has a plan. We could all be rich. You could be part of this, Eddie. With your access, your knowledge..." I held up my hand, silencing her. "That's all I needed to hear." Frank stepped forward, badge in hand. "Alice Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny." The look of betrayal on her face would have been almost comical if it wasn't so pathetic. "You set me up," she whispered. "All this time." "No, Alice. You set yourself up. I just made sure you left enough evidence to bury yourself." As Frank read her rights, I pulled up the bank's real security system. "Oh, and Alice, those wire transfers Alan's trying to push through, they're not just failing, they're providing us with every server he's using, every account he's trying to access, every conspirator involved in your little scheme." She stared at me, mascara starting to run as tears formed in her eyes. "I loved you, Eddie. At the beginning, I really did." "I'm sure you did," I said, turning back to my computer. "But you loved money more, and now you've lost both." As Frank led her away, I opened my secure email and began typing, "Attention all branches, suspected fraud alert. Case number 2025-117 confirmed. Begin asset recovery protocol immediately." Alice had thought she could use my position, my knowledge, my bank to fund her escape with her lover. Instead, she'd learned the hard way that you don't try to con a man who spent his life stopping cons. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from Alan. "What the hell is happening?" "The transfers aren't going through," I smiled, typing a response. "Check your accounts, Alan, all of them. Then ask yourself if trying to steal from a bank manager was really your smartest move." Because while Alice and Alan had been planning their big score, I'd been quietly freezing accounts, documenting evidence, and preparing for this moment. They thought they were the players, but they'd been the ones getting played all along. As I watched the fraud alerts continue to roll in, tracking every desperate attempt Alan was making to salvage their plan, I felt no satisfaction, no joy in their downfall. Just a cold, professional appreciation for a job well done. After all, this was just another day at the bank, and I was very, very good at my job. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in financial forensics. From my office high above the city, I orchestrated a takedown that would become a case study in banking fraud prevention. But while Frank and his team were rounding up Alan's co-conspirators, I was focusing on something more personal, dismantling Alice's entire financial world, piece by piece. "You've got a decision to make," Frank said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a thick stack of files. "We've frozen their known accounts, but our forensic team found something interesting. Alice has been squirreling away money in a series of offshore accounts that aren't in the original warrant." I raised an eyebrow. "How much?" "Close to 3 million. Looks like she's been skimming from every scam they pulled, keeping a personal insurance policy that even Alan doesn't know about." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. At least she'd been smart enough not to trust her partner in crime completely. "Can we touch the accounts?" Frank shook his head. "Not officially. They're in a jurisdiction that won't cooperate without months of paperwork. By then she could access them from prison," I finished. "Unless—" A slow smile spread across my face as I pulled up my banking terminal. Alice thought those accounts were untouchable, hidden behind layers of shell companies and fake names. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd used my bank's international wire system to set them up. "Watch and learn, Frank," I said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "When you transfer money internationally, it has to go through what we call correspondent banks. Each one leaves a unique tracking number. Like breadcrumbs," Frank nodded. "Exactly. Alice covered her tracks well, but she didn't understand one crucial thing about banking. There's no such thing as an untraceable transaction. Every transfer, every account, every digital penny leaves a trail. And if you know where to look." I pulled up a series of codes that would make no sense to anyone who hadn't spent years in international banking. To me, they were a roadmap. "See these routing numbers? They all originate from our bank. Alice might have moved the money through a dozen different accounts, but she had to start somewhere. And that somewhere was right here," Frank finished, leaning forward. "But how does that help us?" I started typing commands into the system. "Because as regional manager, I have the authority to flag any transaction that originated from our bank as potentially fraudulent. Once flagged, the receiving banks have to freeze the accounts pending investigation," Frank said, understanding dawning on his face. "Which means while Alice sits in custody, thinking she still has her safety net." I hit the final key with a flourish. On my screen, dozens of transactions began lighting up red, triggering automated alerts across multiple banking systems. By the time she realizes what's happened, it'll be too late. The money will be locked down tighter than she is." Frank whistled low. "Remind me never to get on your bad side." But I wasn't done. Alice hadn't just tried to steal money. She'd tried to destroy my reputation, my career, everything I'd spent years building. Now it was my turn to show her exactly what that felt like. I pulled up another screen, this one showing Alice's personal accounts, the legitimate ones, the ones she'd had before she met Alan. "Did you know," I said conversationally, "that as regional manager, I'm required to report any suspected fraud to all major financial institutions, not just our own bank, but every bank in the network?" Frank's eyes widened as he realized what I was doing. "You're going to blacklist her. I'm going to make sure that for the rest of her life, every time she tries to open an account, apply for a credit card, even cash a check, her name will raise more red flags than a communist parade." My phone buzzed. A text from Alice's lawyer. "Mr. Mitchell, my client would like to discuss a plea arrangement. Perhaps we could meet." I ignored it, focusing instead on the task at hand. One by one, I was dismantling every financial resource Alice had ever had. The credit cards she'd hidden from me, cancelled, the investment accounts she'd opened under her maiden name, frozen, the safety deposit boxes at other banks, flagged for immediate investigation. "You know," Frank said, watching me work, "most guys in your situation would just clean out the joint accounts and be done with it." I smiled grimly. "Most guys aren't bank managers. Alice didn't just commit fraud, she committed it using my bank systems, my protocols, my expertise. She tried to use everything I've spent my career building to fund her escape with her lover. So I'm not just going to take her money, you're going to take her entire financial future. Exactly. By the time I was done, Alice wouldn't be able to open a library card, let alone a bank account. Every financial institution in the country would know her name, know her face, know exactly what she'd tried to do. My computer pinged with a new alert. Alan had just tried to access one of their backup accounts, an account they thought I didn't know about. I watched as the transaction was automatically declined, imagining his growing panic as he realized every safety net they'd built was disappearing. Another text from Alice's lawyer. My client is willing to return all stolen funds in exchange for leniency. Too late. The money was already locked down, the accounts frozen, the evidence secured. Alice and Alan had thought they were so clever, playing their long game, setting up their elaborate scheme. But they'd forgotten the most important rule in banking. The house always wins, and I was the house. I looked at my watch, nearly midnight. I'd been at this for hours, methodically dismantling every financial resource Alice and Alan had built. Frank had stayed with me, providing legal authority when needed, watching as I turned their own schemes against them. You know what the beautiful part is, I said, leaning back in my chair. Tomorrow morning, when the international markets open, all those clever little accounts they set up, they're going to start triggering fraud alerts across the global banking system. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. Frank nodded. But what about your reputation? The bank's reputation? I pulled up one. Final screen. A press release I'd prepared documenting how the bank's security systems had caught and prevented a major international fraud attempt. By this time tomorrow, every financial institution in the country will know two things. That First Capital Bank's security systems are unbeatable, and that Edward Mitchell is the man who made them that way. Frank chuckled. You're not just destroying them financially. You're going to use their attempt to ruin you to make your reputation even stronger. Alice wanted to play in the big leagues, I said, hitting send on the press release. She just forgot that she was playing against the house, and in this game, the house always wins. Frank finished. I sat back, watching as my systems continued their work, systematically locking down every financial avenue Alice and Alan had tried to create. They'd thought they were setting up their perfect escape. Instead, they'd handed me everything I needed to destroy them completely. Tomorrow, they would wake up in custody to discover that every penny they'd stolen, every account they'd hidden, every plan they'd made was gone. And they would learn the hard way that trying to con a bank manager wasn't just stupid, it was financially suicidal. The morning headlines hit exactly as I'd planned. Major banking fraud scheme foiled by First Capital Security. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Calls from other bank executives, financial journalists, even competitors wanting to know how we'd caught such a sophisticated operation. But I was focused on a different kind of notification. My security system had just pinged with an alert. Someone was attempting to access one of Alice's hidden accounts from inside the detention center. Right on schedule, I murmured, pulling up the activity log on my screen. I'd been waiting for this moment. The moment Alice would try to access her emergency funds, the money she'd hidden even from Alan. I watched as she entered password after password, each attempt more desperate than the last. What she didn't know was that I'd already replaced all her security protocols with my own. Every failed login was being recorded, documenting her attempts to access fraudulent accounts. Frank walked into my office, coffee in hand. You look way too happy for someone whose wife is in jail. Just watching a master con artist realize she's been conned, I replied, turning my screen so he could see. Look at this. She's trying to access accounts in Singapore, Dubai, the Caymans, accounts she thought were untraceable. How many backup plans did she have? I pulled up a complex diagram on my second monitor. 23 separate escape Routes, each with its own funding source. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years, setting up shell companies, establishing offshore accounts, creating alternate identities. And you found all of them? A cold smile crossed my face. No, Frank. I let her think she was hiding them from me. Every time she set up a new account, every time she moved money thinking she was being clever, my systems were tracking it, building evidence, creating an audit trail that she can't possibly explain away. My phone buzzed. Alice's lawyer again. This time I answered. Mr. Mitchell. The lawyer's voice was tense. My client would like to speak with you. She says there's been a misunderstanding about certain financial matters. A misunderstanding, I repeated, my voice dripping with fake concern. You mean like the misunderstanding about the $20 million she and her boyfriend tried to steal from my bank? Or the misunderstanding about the fake identities? Or maybe the misunderstanding about the $3 million she skimmed from? There are other scams? Silence on the other end. Then, how did you know about the money she hid from Alan? I finished. Let's just say banking is my expertise. Your client seems to have forgotten that. Mr. Mitchell, perhaps we could come to an arrangement. My client has information about other operations, other players. You mean the operations I've already documented? The players my systems have already identified? I pulled up another screen, this one showing a web of connections linking Alice and Alan to dozens of other fraudsters. Tell Alice that her information is worthless. I already have everything I need. I hung up, turning to Frank. How long until she breaks? He checked his watch. Given what you've done to her accounts, I give it an hour before she realizes she's got nothing left to bargain with. Right on cue, my computer pinged with another alert. Alan was now trying to access their backup accounts from his own holding cell. I watched as his attempts grew increasingly desperate, each failed login adding to the mountain of evidence against them. You know what the beautiful part is? I said, pulling up yet another screen. Every time they try to access these accounts, they're actually helping us. Each attempt creates a new timestamp, a new data point linking them directly to the fraud. Frank leaned in, studying the data flowing across my screen. You're not just stopping them from getting the money, you're using their desperation against them. Exactly. By the time their case goes to trial, we'll have documented proof of them trying to access every single fraudulent account. Their own actions are building our case for us. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. You think you're so clever, Eddie, but you have no idea what's coming. I showed the message to Frank, who immediately started tracing it, but I already knew who it was from. One of Alan's associates, probably thinking they could intimidate me. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I pulled up my banking terminal, fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, I'd traced the phone number through its payment records, linking it to another player in their network. Got you, I murmured, sending the information to Frank. That's another one for the case file, he said, already dispatching officers. How many of their associates are you planning to take down? All of them, I replied simply. Every single person who helped them, who knew about their plans, who thought they could use my bank for their schemes. By the time I'm done, there won't be a financial institution in the world that will touch any of them. My computer chimed with another alert. Alice was now trying to access accounts under her maiden name. Accounts she'd set up long before she met me, thinking they were her ultimate backup plan. Watch this, I told Frank, pulling up the account details. She thinks these accounts are safe because they predate our marriage. What she doesn't know is... I typed in a command, and suddenly all the account information changed. Where there had been millions, there were now zeros. Where there had been secret passwords, there were now fraud alerts. How did you get access to those? Frank asked, impressed. Remember when she signed our joint banking agreement? Page 47, paragraph 3 gave me authority to investigate any accounts linked to our joint finances, including accounts she opened before she met me. She never read the fine print, did she? Con artists never do. They're too busy looking for loopholes to notice when they're walking into a trap. Another text came through. You can't possibly have found everything. Nobody's that good. I laughed, showing Frank the message. They still think this is a game. They still think there's something I missed, some account I didn't find, some plan I haven't uncovered. Did you miss anything? I pulled up one final screen, a complete map of every financial transaction Alice and Alan had made over the past year. Every account, every transfer, every penny they'd tried to hide. The thing about banking, I said, studying the complex web of transactions, is that money always leaves a trail. You can hide it, you can move it, you can try to disguise it, but in the end, everything connects. And if you know where to look, you can find anything. Frank finished. Exactly. Alice and Alan thought they were clever, thought they could outsmart the system, but they forgot one crucial thing. What's that? I smiled, hitting a key that triggered one final series of account freezes. I designed the system. By late afternoon, the full impact of my financial assault was becoming clear. I sat in my office, watching the dominoes fall one by one through my banking terminals. But it wasn't just Alice and Alan's world that was unraveling. Their entire network was collapsing like a house of cards. My phone lit up with a call from the detention center. I put it on speaker so Frank could hear. Eddie. Alice's voice was shaky, all her usual confidence gone. What have you done? I think you mean, what have you done, Alice? I'm just following standard banking procedures for suspected fraud. Standard procedures? Her voice rose an octave. You've frozen everything, every account, every asset, even my trust fund from before we met. I leaned back in my chair, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. Did you really think I wouldn't? Find the trust fund, Alice. The one you'd been using to funnel money through shell companies in the Caymans. There was a long pause. How did you know about that? The same way I know about the safety deposit boxes in Dubai, the numbered accounts in Switzerland, the cryptocurrency wallets you thought were untraceable. I pulled up a comprehensive diagram on my screen. Would you like me to go on? You can't do this, she whispered. Some of those accounts, they're not just mine. There are other people, involved, powerful people. You mean like Gregory Harrison at Pacific Trust? Or maybe Thomas Walker from the Singapore Exchange? I watched her sharp intake of breath through the call monitoring system. Did you really think I wouldn't find your entire network? Frank raised an eyebrow, impressed. These were names we hadn't discussed, players even he hadn't known about. They'll come after you, Alice threatened, but I could hear the fear beneath her bravado. No, they won't, I replied calmly, because right now, every single one of your associates is dealing with their own problems. Would you like to know what's happening to Mr. Harrison's accounts? Or how about Mr. Walker's trading privileges? I pulled up another screen, showing the cascading effect of my financial assault. One by one, all of Alice and Alan's conspirators were watching their financial empires crumble. You see, Alice, while you and Alan were playing your little games, thinking you were so clever, I was mapping every connection, every transaction, every relationship in your network. And now what? Her voice was barely a whisper. Now they're all going down. Every single person who helped you, who worked with you, who thought they could use my bank for their schemes. I'm not just destroying you and Alan, I'm dismantling your entire operation. My computer pinged with new alerts, more attempts to access frozen accounts, more desperate transfers being blocked, more evidence piling up against them. The funny thing is, I continued, you actually helped me do it. Every time you moved money, every time you set up a new account, every time you made a connection with another player, you left a trail, and I followed every single one. Frank handed me a note. More arrests were being made. Bankers, lawyers, accountants, all the supposedly respectable professionals who'd helped Alice and Alan build their fraud empire. Want to know what's happening right now? I asked, my voice taking on an almost educational tone. Your friend Harrison just tried to access his emergency funds in Hong Kong, but instead of finding his millions, he found frozen accounts and fraud alerts. Walker's trading privileges have been suspended across every major exchange, and those are just the beginning. Eddie, please, Alice's voice cracked. You don't understand what you're doing. These people, they won't just accept this, they'll fight back. I laughed, the sound empty of humor. With what resources? Every account they control has been flagged for suspicious activity. Every transaction they try to make is being monitored. Every attempt to access their funds is creating more evidence against them. But the offshore accounts are all linked back to my bank's international wire system. Did you forget who designed those protocols, Alice? Who spent years building the security systems you thought you could bypass? There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of her shaky breathing. How long? She finally asked. How long have you known? I pulled up my initial case file, dated months before she and Alan had tried their big heist. Long enough to document everything. Every meeting, every transaction, every plan you made. While you thought you were setting me up, I was building a case that will take down your entire network. Why didn't you stop us sooner? A cold smile crossed my face. Because I wanted to give you enough rope to hang yourselves, and you did not disappoint. My computer chimed with another series of alerts. More accounts being frozen, more assets being seized, more evidence being gathered. It's not just about the money anymore, is it? She asked quietly. It never was. You and Alan didn't just try to steal from me. You tried to use my life's work, my expertise, my bank to fund your schemes. So now I'm using that same expertise to destroy everything you've built. Frank handed me another update. The investigation had expanded to 3 continents now, with financial institutions worldwide cooperating to unravel Alice and Alan's network. One last thing, I said, my finger hovering over the keyboard. Remember that backup plan you thought no one knew about? The one even Alan doesn't know about? Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. Check your golden parachute account. Alice, the one in Zurich. I heard keys clicking as she accessed the detention center's computer system. Then silence. How? She breathed. That account was perfect. The documentation, the paperwork, was all routed through my bank's correspondence system. Like I said, everything leaves a trail, and I found every single one. I ended the call, turning to Frank. How many arrests so far? 17 and counting. Financial crimes units in 8 countries are moving on the intelligence you provided. This isn't just taking down Alice and Alan anymore. This is dismantling an entire international fraud network. I nodded, watching as my systems continued their work, methodically destroying every financial resource Alice and her associates had built. You know, Frank said thoughtfully, most guys would have just been happy to catch their wife cheating. But you turned this into one of the biggest financial fraud busts in history. I smiled grimly. Alice wanted to play in the world of high finance. She just forgot that in this world, I'm the house. And the house always wins, Frank finished. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from an encrypted number. You have no idea what you've started. I showed it to Frank, who immediately began tracing it. But I already knew it didn't matter. Whoever sent it was about to learn the same lesson as Alice and Alan. You don't try to con a banker in his own bank. The next morning, as I sat in my office reviewing the latest damage reports, something unexpected happened. My private line rang. A number I hadn't seen in years. The caller ID displayed Alvin Morrison, Federal Banking Commission. Edward Mitchell, the familiar voice said when I answered. I hear you've been making waves. I smiled, remembering our last interaction. 5 years ago, when he'd tried to recruit me to the commission. Just doing my job, Alvin, protecting the integrity of our banking system by dismantling one of the largest financial fraud networks we've seen in a decade. He chuckled. I've got the preliminary reports on my desk. This goes way beyond a Scorned husband catching his wife in a scam. I pulled up my latest analysis on the screen. How much have you uncovered? Enough to know that your wife and her boyfriend were just the tip of the iceberg. We're looking at connections to 3 major investment banks, 2 international exchanges, and at least a dozen hedge funds. The question is, how deep do you want this to go? Frank walked in just then, carrying a thick file. I put Alvin on speaker. Remember, that trust fund Alice thought was untouchable, Frank said, dropping the file on my desk. Turns out it wasn't just her money. We've traced deposits from some very interesting sources. I opened the file, scanning the names. Politicians, CEOs, supposed pillars of the financial community, all connected through a web of transactions that led back to Alice's network. I'm seeing the same names, Alvin confirmed through the speaker. This isn't just fraud anymore. Edward, this is potentially systemic corruption. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the implications. What had started as personal revenge was evolving into something much bigger. Send me everything you have, Alvin continued. The commission is preparing a task force, and we want you involved. Officially. Frank raised an eyebrow. You're going to work with the feds. I pulled up another screen, showing the latest attempts to access the frozen accounts. The desperation was becoming palpable, millions in attempted transfers, all blocked by my systems. On one condition, I told Alvin, I maintain control of the banking systems. Any action goes through my protocols. Agreed, Alvin said without hesitation. But you should know, some very powerful people are starting to ask questions. Your name is coming up in conversations you might not want to be part of. I smiled coldly. Let them ask. Every move they make, every account they try to access, every threat they attempt just gives us more evidence. After ending the call, I turned to Frank. How's our favorite couple doing in detention? Alice isn't talking, but Alan's singing like a canary. He's realized she had her own escape plan without him, and he's not happy about it. I pulled up the detention center's communication logs. Watch this. On the screen, we could see Alan's latest attempts to contact his network. Each message was more desperate than the last, as he realized every safety net he thought he had was disappearing. The thing about people like Alan, I said, is that they always think they're the smartest person in the room. They never consider that someone else might be 10 steps ahead. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Back off now, and maybe you keep your position. Keep pushing, and we'll bury you. I showed it to Frank, who immediately began tracing it, but I was already ahead of him, pulling up the routing data that showed exactly where the threat had originated. Interesting, I murmured. This came from an IP address registered to Pacific Trust. Looks like Mr. Harrison is getting nervous. Want me to pick him up? Frank asked. I shook my head. Not yet. Let's see how he reacts to this. I typed a command into my system, and suddenly every account Harrison controlled at Pacific Trust lit up with fraud alerts. Not just the obvious ones, but the hidden accounts, the shell companies, the offshore holdings he thought were untraceable. You see, I explained to Frank, people like Harrison, Alice, Alan, they think banking is just about moving money. They don't understand that every transaction tells a story, and if you know how to read those stories, you can predict their next move, Frank finished. Exactly. Right now, Harrison is sitting in his office, watching his entire financial empire collapse. In about 30 seconds, he's going to try to access his emergency funds in Singapore. Right. On cue, my system pinged with an alert. Harrison was attempting to transfer millions through his Singapore accounts. Now watch this, I said, typing another command. The transfer appeared to go through, but instead of reaching its intended destination, the money was now trapped in a holding pattern, generating more evidence with every attempted movement. You're not just stopping them, Frank realized. You're letting them think they still have options, just so they'll keep trying. And every time they try, they dig themselves deeper. My phone rang again. This time it was Alice's lawyer. "Mr. Mitchell, my client would like to revise her earlier statement. She has information about certain international transactions that might interest you." "You mean the transactions I've already documented, or perhaps the ones I'm tracking right now?" I pulled up a live feed of financial activity across multiple institutions. "Tell Alice that her information is worthless. I don't need her cooperation to dismantle her network." After hanging up, I turned to Frank. "How long until Harrison realizes what's happening?" "Given what you just did to his accounts, I give it an hour." I nodded, pulling up another screen. "That should be just enough time to—" My computer suddenly pinged with multiple alerts. Someone was trying to breach our bank's security systems, a sophisticated attack targeting our core protocols. "Right on schedule," I smiled, watching as my countermeasures kicked in. "They think they can hack their way out of this." Frank leaned in, studying the attack patterns. "This is professional, military-grade stuff." Of course it is. They're desperate. But what they don't realize— I typed a series of commands, and suddenly the attack reversed. Instead of breaching our systems, the hackers were now unwittingly providing us with direct access to their own networks. "You knew they'd try this," Frank said, understanding dawning on his face. "I've spent years preparing for exactly this scenario. Every attack they launch, every system they try to breach, just gives us more access to their operations." My phone buzzed again. Another message from Harrison. "What do you want? Name your price." I showed it to Frank, who shook his head in amazement. "They still think this is about money." "That's why they'll never win," I replied, initiating another series of account freezes. "They don't understand that some things can't be bought." On my screens, I could see the entire financial landscape shifting. Banks across the globe were now implementing the fraud protocols I'd developed, locking down accounts, tracking suspicious transactions, dismantling the very network Alice and her associates had spent years building. "You know," Frank said thoughtfully, "when this started, I thought you were just getting revenge on a cheating wife. But this is something else entirely." I nodded, watching as more alerts flooded my system. Alice and Alan thought they could use my bank to commit their perfect crime. Instead, they gave me everything I needed to expose corruption that goes all the way to the top. And now we watch as they realize exactly who they were dealing with. Because in banking, Frank, there's one rule that always holds true. The house always wins. I smiled, initiating one final series of protocols that would seal their fate. The house always wins. The morning started with an unexpected visit from Alvin Morrison, the Federal Banking Commissioner. He strode into my office unannounced, flanked by two agents and carrying a laptop. "You need to see this, Edward," he said, setting up his computer on my desk. "Last night we intercepted communications between some very interesting parties." I leaned forward as he pulled up a series of encrypted messages. The names attached to them made even me pause. Senators, multinational CEOs, heads of major financial institutions. "Your wife's little network," Alvin continued. "It goes higher than anyone imagined. These people—" He gestured at the screen. "They're all connected through a series of transactions that trace back to the accounts you've been monitoring." Frank, who had been reviewing case files in the corner, joined us at the desk. "How big are we talking?" "Global," Alvin replied. "We're looking at systematic manipulation of international markets, insider trading on a massive scale, political influence being bought and sold through hidden accounts." I pulled up my own monitoring systems, cross-referencing the names from Alvin's intel with the transaction patterns I'd been tracking. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a complex web of financial movements. "Every one of these legitimate institutions has been laundering money through the same network Alice and Alan were using. They just did it more carefully, hiding it behind layers of seemingly legal transactions." "The question is," Alvin leaned back, studying me carefully, "how far are you willing to go with this? These people, they can make things very difficult for you." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from an unlisted number. "Last chance, Mitchell. Walk away now, or everything you've built disappears." I showed the message to Alvin and Frank, then pulled up another screen on my system. "Watch this." With a few keystrokes, I initiated a protocol I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Across my monitors, hundreds of accounts began lighting up with fraud alerts, not just the obvious criminal accounts, but the supposedly legitimate ones that had been hiding in plain sight. "What did you just do?" Frank asked, leaning forward. "I released the evidence. Every transaction, every connection, every piece of data showing how these respected institutions have been participating in international fraud. It's all being sent to regulatory agencies worldwide." Alvin's eyes widened. "You're going to crash the entire system." "No," I corrected him. "I'm going to clean it. These people think they're untouchable because they've buried their crimes under layers of legitimate business, but they forgot one thing." "What's that?" "Every transaction leaves a trace. And I've been following those traces for months, building a map of corruption that goes all the way to the top." My phone started buzzing continuously. Messages from some of the most powerful people in the financial world, all realizing simultaneously that their carefully constructed schemes were unraveling. "They'll try to stop this," Alvin warned. "They'll claim national security, market stability, whatever it takes to bury the evidence." I smiled coldly. "They can try, but the protocols I've initiated can't be stopped. Every attempt to suppress this information will only spread it further." Frank whistled low. "You're not just exposing Alice's network, you're exposing everyone who's ever used it." "Exactly. Alice and Alan thought they were clever, playing their little games with my bank systems, but they were just small players in a much bigger game. And now you're taking down the whole game," Alvin finished. My computer pinged with new alerts. The first wave of evidence was hitting regulatory agencies across the globe. Markets were already reacting as the scale of the corruption began to emerge. "Mr. Mitchell," my assistant's voice came through the intercom, "you have calls from the heads of 6 major banks, 3 regulatory agencies, and the Treasury Secretary." "Let them wait," I replied, watching as more dominoes fell across my screens. "You realize," Alvin said quietly, "that some of these people are considered too big to fail." "No one's too big to fail," I countered, initiating another wave of protocols. "They just haven't met the right person to make them fail." My phone buzzed again. Alice's lawyer. "My client is prepared to provide testimony about certain high-level connections." "Too late," I murmured, sending the message to voicemail. "Alice still thinks she has something to bargain with. She doesn't realize her entire world is already burning." Frank's phone rang. It was his superior at the Financial Crimes Unit. "Sir?" "Yes, we're seeing it too. No, this isn't just local anymore. This is—" "Yes, I understand. We'll need international cooperation." I turned to Alvin. "Your commission is about to be very busy. Every major financial institution in the world is going to be scrambling to explain their connections to this network." He nodded grimly. "You've started something that can't be stopped, Edward. Are you ready for what comes next?" I pulled up one final screen, a comprehensive map of every transaction, every connection, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. It was beautiful in its complexity, a perfect illustration of how deep the corruption went. I've been ready for this since the moment I realized what Alice and Alan were really part of. They thought they were using my bank for their schemes. Instead, they led me straight to the heart of a system that needs to be torn down. My computer chimed with another series of alerts. More accounts being frozen, more evidence being released, more powerful people realizing their time was up. "You know," Frank said thoughtfully, "when this started, it was about catching your wife in a fraud scheme. Now it's about justice," I finished. "Real justice, not the kind that can be bought and sold by people who think they're above the law." Alvin stood, gathering his files. "I'll need everything you have. The commission is going to be working overtime to process all this." I handed him a secure drive. "It's all here. Every transaction, every connection, every piece of evidence needed to dismantle the entire system." As he left, Frank turned to me. "What now?" I looked at my screens, watching as the financial world began to reshape itself in response to what I'd unleashed. Now we watch as they realize that everything they built, everything they thought was secure, is about to come crashing down. My phone buzzed one final time, another message from the unknown number. "You have no idea what you've done." I smiled, typing a response. "No, you have no idea what I've done, but you're about to find out. Because tomorrow, when the markets opened, when the full scope of my evidence became clear, when every corrupt player in their network realized just how thoroughly I'd mapped their connections, that's when they'd understand. They hadn't just tried to use my bank for their schemes. They'd given me the keys to tear down their entire corrupt empire, and I was just getting started. The morning headlines screamed across every financial news network: "Global banking scandal exposed." Market futures were plunging worldwide as the evidence I'd released sent shockwaves through the financial system. But I was focused on a more personal confrontation. "Bring her in," I told Frank, settling behind my desk. Minutes later, Alice walked into my office, escorted by 2 officers. She looked different now, her designer clothes replaced by prison attire, her perfectly manicured appearance showing signs of strain. But her eyes still held that calculating look I'd come to recognize. "I want to make a deal," she said, without preamble. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit down, Alice. Let's talk about what you think you have to offer." She sat, her posture still maintaining that air of confidence she'd always carried. "You've made your point, Eddie. You've frozen our accounts, exposed our network, but there's more, things you haven't found yet." I pulled up my monitoring screens, turning them so she could see. "You mean like the secondary network operating through Pacific Trust, or the political slush funds in Singapore? Or maybe," I paused, watching her face, "the private accounts you set up under your mother's maiden name?" For the first time, I saw real fear crack through her composure. "How did you find everything, Alice? Did you really think I wouldn't? Banking isn't just my job, it's my expertise. Every account you opened, every transfer you made, every connection you thought was hidden, I found them all." "Then you know how big this really is." She leaned forward. "These people, Eddie, they're not just wealthy. They're powerful. They can make problems disappear, or make people disappear." I laughed, the sound empty of humor. "Is that supposed to frighten me? Let me show you something." I typed a command, and my screens filled with transaction records, communications, evidence trails, all linking back to the very people she thought would protect her. "While you and Alan were playing your little games, thinking you were so clever, I was mapping the entire system. Every corrupt banker, every compromised official, every dirty deal. And now what?" she whispered. "Now they're all going down. The evidence is already out there, spreading across every regulatory agency worldwide. Your powerful friends? They're too busy trying to save themselves to worry about you." Her facade cracked completely. "You don't understand what you've done. These people, they won't just accept this. They'll fight back." "With what?" I asked calmly. "Their accounts are frozen. Their networks are exposed. Their secrets are becoming headlines. Tell me, Alice, what exactly do they have left?" She stared at the screens, watching as more alerts rolled in, more accounts being frozen, more evidence being uncovered, more powerful players falling. "I can help you," she tried one last time. "I know things that aren't in any system, any database, like the meetup planned for next week. The one where your network was going to move billions through shell companies in Dubai." I pulled up another screen. "Or perhaps the contingency plans your friends made in case they were exposed, the ones involving private jets and non-extradition." Oh, countries! The color drained from her face. How long have you known? Long enough to document everything, every meeting, every plan, every backup scheme. While you thought you were playing me, I was dismantling your entire world piece by piece. My phone buzzed. Alvin Morrison. Major arrests beginning worldwide. The evidence is solid. No one's getting out of this. I showed Alice the message. Your friends are falling one by one. The corrupt system you thought would protect you is crumbling. And you're just another player who thought they could beat the house. What do you want? She asked, her voice small. Want? I don't want anything from you, Alice. This isn't a negotiation. This is me showing you exactly what happens when you try. To con a banker in his own bank. Frank stepped forward. We need to get her back to custody. The FBI wants to question her about some of the international connections. I nodded, but Alice wasn't done. Eddie, please, we can still fix this. We had something real once. The only real thing, I cut her off, was my expertise in banking. Everything else, our marriage, your love, your supposed loyalty, that was all part of your con. But you forgot one crucial detail. What's that? You tried to use my life's work against me, and in doing so, you gave me everything I needed to destroy not just you, but the entire corrupt system you were part of. As Frank led her away, I turned back to my screens, watching as the financial world continued to transform. Alice had thought she was clever, using her marriage to a bank manager to facilitate her schemes. Instead, she'd helped expose corruption that went to the very top of the financial system. My phone buzzed again, another message from one of the powerful players whose world was crumbling. This isn't over, Mitchell. I smiled, typing a response. You're right, it's not over, it's just beginning. Because while Alice and her associates had been playing their games, thinking they were untouchable, I'd been building something much bigger, not just evidence of their crimes, but a complete map of systemic corruption that had festered in the banking world for decades. And now, as I watched the dominoes continue to fall, I realized that what had started as personal revenge had become something much more important. It had become a cleansing fire, burning away the corruption that had rotted the heart of global finance. Alice had wanted to play in the world of high finance. Instead, she'd helped tear it down, and I was just getting started. 1 month later, I stood in my office, looking out over the city skyline as the morning sun painted the buildings in shades of gold. The financial world had changed dramatically since the day I'd exposed Alice's network. What had started as personal revenge had triggered the largest financial reform in modern history. My phone buzzed, Frank calling with the latest updates. The sentencing just came down, he said without preamble. Alice got 20 years, Alan got 25, but here's the interesting part. They're not even the biggest fish we caught. I pulled up the morning's headlines on my screens. Global. Financial reform bill passes. Banking executives face unprecedented charges. Mitchell appointed to International Banking Oversight Committee. How many arrests total? I asked, though I already knew the number. 347 worldwide, Frank replied, including 62 bank executives, 28 government officials, and 15 people who thought they were too powerful to ever face consequences. I smiled, remembering how those same powerful people had threatened me when I first exposed their corruption. Now they were facing justice, their empires dismantled, their corrupt networks exposed. Have you seen today's banking reports? Frank continued. The new security protocols you designed are being implemented globally. They're calling it the Mitchell Standards. Complete transparency, real-time transaction monitoring, automated fraud detection. And Alice? I asked, though I'd been monitoring her situation closely, still trying to make deals, but nobody's interested anymore. All her leverage, all her connections, they're gone. She's just another convicted fraudster now. I pulled up the final report I'd compiled. a complete documentation of everything that had happened since that first suspicious bank alert. It read like a thriller. International fraud, corrupt officials, billions in stolen money, and at the center of it all, a wife who thought she could outsmart her banker husband. My assistant buzzed through. "Mr. Mitchell, the Federal Banking Commission is here for your meeting. Send them in," I replied, gathering my files. Alvin Morrison led the group, looking more energized than I'd ever seen him. "Edward, the implementation is proceeding faster than we anticipated. Every major bank in the world is adopting your protocols." I nodded, pulling up the latest statistics. The system caught 3 major fraud attempts just this morning, patterns that would have gone unnoticed under the old protocols. "Which is why we're here," Alvin said, spreading out documents on my desk. "We want you to head the new International Banking Oversight Division, complete authority to implement reforms, investigate suspicious activities, and prevent another network like Alice's from ever taking root." I studied the offer, thinking about how far things had come. What had started as a way to catch my wife's fraud had evolved into something that was reshaping the entire financial world. My phone buzzed with a message. Alice's lawyer making one last attempt. "My client has additional information." I deleted it without reading further. Alice still didn't understand that her information was worthless now. The system she'd tried to exploit was gone, replaced by something stronger, more transparent, more resistant to corruption. "There's something poetic about this," Frank said, having stayed to watch the meeting. "Alice and her friends thought they could use banking to steal millions. Instead, they triggered reforms that will prevent billions in fraud." I signed the commission papers, accepting the new position. They never understood what banking really is. They thought it was just about moving money, exploiting loopholes. They didn't realize it's about trust, about protecting people's financial security. Alvin gathered the signed documents. "The irony is, if they hadn't tried to steal from you specifically, if they'd picked any other bank manager to con, none of this would have happened." "That's the thing about people like Alice," I replied, watching as more fraud alerts rolled across my screens, each one caught by the new protocols. "They're so focused on the con, they never stop to really know their mark." My phone buzzed one final time, a message from an unknown number. "You've changed everything." For once they were right. The financial world had changed. The corrupt networks had been exposed. The people who thought they were above the law were facing justice. And it had all started because Alice forgot one crucial detail about her husband. In banking, the house always wins. As I looked out over the city again, I thought about everything that had happened. Alice had wanted to use my expertise to steal millions. Instead, she'd helped create a system that would protect billions. She thought she was running the perfect con. But in the end, she'd just been another player who forgot the first rule of banking. Never try to con the house. Because the house, the system, the protocols, the expertise that I'd spent my life building, it didn't just win. It changed the game entirely, and as I settled into my new role, implementing reforms that would reshape global finance, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. Alice and her network had spent years corrupting the banking system, thinking they were untouchable. Instead, they'd triggered its complete transformation. They'd wanted to break the bank. Instead, they'd helped make it unbreakable, and that, perhaps, was the greatest revenge of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.